Good evening, everybody. Andrew Cooperrider here with another fresh brewed Kentucky politics, your news around Kentucky, with an actual conservative, liberty-minded response. Like I say every time, if you can find me another conservative podcast in Kentucky, real conservative podcast on this Rhino BS, send it to me, please. I'd love to hear what everybody else is saying on this stuff. But thank you guys so much for joining me this evening. I please ask you to hit the share button, because that's what you do when you're watching a video and there's a video you like and there's a person on there you like. You hit the share button to share them. That's what happens. That's what you're supposed to do. This is also podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple as well. Please leave a review on Apple. I guess that's a thing. I don't know. I'm kind of new to this. I just sit here and spout out things. But welcome, Fresh Brew Kentucky Politics. If you want to support us, please feel free to check us out at the coffee shop there in Lexington. As well, you can buy our beans online at brewedco.com, brewedco.com. We've got a lot of news. I might go a little bit longer today. We'll see. But, man, we've got some big news to go through. We've got Charlie Kirk came to town. If you guys pay attention to my Facebook, I went to that. Kind of give you my rundown of that speaking engagement there he had and what I thought about it. Bashir has many vetoes he has issued since we've last spoken. I think he may be setting a record in vetoes. I don't know. But we have one veto in particular. His veto on HB 192, the budget, one of the budget bills. He is vetoed, and with an alarming remark on it that we will address here today. I'll tell you guys all about it, because tyranny, real tyranny, is afoot as well. We'll talk a little bit new normal going on here. Get used to it, apparently. One opinion piece out of Bloomberg has said. And Joe Biden says he's going to get 200 million vaccinations done. Let's talk about the feasibility of that really happening. Before I dig into it, once again, guys, please hit the share button. I'm going to remind you guys a couple of times. All right, so Charlie Kirk came to town yesterday. I was honored enough to get to attend, to watch Mr. Kirk give his speech. And I have to say, for his crowd, for his audience, he had a pretty good speech. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously, Charlie Kirk is about bringing and arming college students to be able to talk about conservative values. For that reason, I don't expect him to go very, very deep into anything. I expect him to kind of do what he did, where he talked about issues, he supported it with a little bit of facts, a little bit of knowledge, enough to definitely combat the people on college campuses, the more leftist people on college campuses that you see. And a big part of that is because they're not very well informed either on their issues. In fact, if they were better informed, they probably would be conservatives. But anyway, so he kind of rolled down through those, and that was a lot of good things. I think I had a few quotes that he said that I really liked. I don't know if they were his quotes first or if they were just quotes he had heard somewhere and repeated, but I figured I will go in here on this. Let's see here. If your biggest concern is existential, you must be living a great life. That was a pretty good one-liner. He said, basically, he's saying, if your greatest concern is something that doesn't even threaten you, something that isn't even a threat to you, like global warming, and what I mean by that is that's an existential threat. That's not a threat that's necessarily going to kill you tomorrow. You have a pretty great life, right? It means that your bills are paid. You've got a roof over your head. You have a generally good enough security to know where your meal comes from, right? I don't think there's many people who are struggling for meals in this country that are worried about global warming. I don't think people in countries that have mass starvation care that much about global warming or the Green New Deal. And the fact that that is even a discussion shows we've got a pretty great life. Another one he said this about the Constitution. Like I said, I don't know if this was his quote per se, but he said, one-liner here, the Constitution was not of their time, but to stand the test of time. I thought that was pretty solid. As well, when you have liberty, you have unequal outcomes. I thought that was a important one-liner he said as well. When you have liberty, when you have freedom of choice, you're naturally going to get unequal outcomes. The example Charlie used in his talk was if you gave everybody in the room $100, told them to come back the next day, what we will have done with that $100 will vastly change depending on the person and what they would do. So that's an example of some of the stuff he talked about. Like I said, I thought it was in depth. Of course, he's not going to hit upon the things that are important to hit upon to people who pay a little more attention to politics and know these baseline stuff. And what I think the big thing we need to talk about is he talked about the future of the GOP, and he kind of mentioned about it becoming the party of the working people. The GOP, more importantly, in my opinion, needs to get goals. We need to get some goals, some policy goals, not just to have a goal that says we need to resist the Democrats, but policy goals, right? Instead of saying we just want a smaller government. No, we want no income tax. Because, naturally, if you don't have as much income tax, you can't have as big of a government. Policy goal, less money into the government, right? Let's say, for an example, a policy goal that says we want no abortions. Let's say that's a policy goal the GOP wants to have. That's a policy goal, an endpoint to push through. See, the Democrats do a good job. They have a lot of goals, right? $15 minimum wage, fight for 15. We hear about that all the time, right? Moms demand action, right? They want their gun control done. They want to take away our guns, and that is exactly what they want to do. They want to take away our guns. Now, the GOP, though, all their goals are to stop the Democrats. Naturally, that's going to pull you in another direction. So, if I had to say there's one thing lacking when Kirk was talking about the future of the GOP, that was one thing I think he could have hit upon a little bit better, is saying what policy goals does he think the GOP needs to adopt and needs to go after over these next years to inspire voters to vote for them again. Not just to be a check, not just be like, hey, I'm not a Democrat. That isn't good enough. That's what people are saying. You need to get some policy goals. So there's just kind of my first thoughts about Charlie Kirk. But overall, I thought it was a pretty good talk and definitely somebody you guys should check out if you've never checked him out. Now, digging into where we are on these vetoes here. And I've got some vetoes here we can talk about. Quite a lot of them. We're going to do a little rundown, what they are, what they mean. So, and also, too, whether or not they will overcome veto, right? So, we've got HB 275, the governor vetoed. What that one would remove Beshear from the State Investment Commission. Beshear says, now, anytime you're gonna hear Beshear say it's unconstitutional a lot of times. He's not just going to say, I disagree with the bill on all of these. And the reason why he's going to say that is because that is setting him up for a court battle. He's setting himself up. He's saying key trigger words such as this is unconstitutional that sets him up to be able to run to his buddy Judge Shepard and say, hey, Judge, and we'll be talking about that dynamic freaking duo here in a second, but he can run to his Judge Shepard and say, Judge, take care of this for me, and he can do that, right? So HB 275, removes Beshear from the State Investment Commission. Beshear said it was unconstitutional because it transfers power from him to the treasurer. And unless your powers are enumerated in the Constitution, unless it specifically says in the Constitution that the governor solely is invested with the power of the State Investment Commission, that power can easily be transferred to the treasurer, who is also an elected official. And that is something governor doesn't have much to do about it. That's something the governor doesn't have much to do about. And part of the reason why, and as we go through this too, something to remember, guys, Kentucky does not have 3 equal branches. I don't know if you guys learned this in civics class about the state. The legislator in Kentucky actually is significantly more powerful than the other 2 branches. In fact, they can remove both judges and governors. Citizens can even ask for impeachment of both judges and governors and executive office officials, but you can't ask for the impeachment of a legislator. So actually, in the state of Kentucky, legislators have a lot more power than the other two do. So understand that is fully within their rights to transfer. Now that passed the House with an 80-16 and a Senate vote of 35-1. What's that tell you? Well, that tells you is that's clearly going to overcome veto. I don't know if the governor takes that one to court. He may try to tie it up with Judge Shepard and everything. He may not. We'll see. But I think that one will overcome veto. HB 394. This revokes the governor's authority over the Fish and Wildlife Commission appointment, basically, and compensation. Beshear said he needs to be able to check the power of the Fish and Wildlife. Now, what's kind of ironic about this is that back in the day when Beshear, I believe, Sr., was the AG, he actually, in fact, wrote a opinion to a legislator on this issue saying the Fish and Wildlife needs to be independent of the governor. Now, the reason why Fish and Wildlife Commission needs to kind of be independent from the rest of the government is quite honestly because first, the Fish and Wildlife Commission is made up of a council, a group of people that are elected by people who hold hunting licenses, I do believe, here in Kentucky. So it's cut up into districts, and then anybody who holds a hunting license can show up and vote on those members to be a part of the commission. Now, I may be saying, well, shouldn't the governor get some say-so there because of tax dollars? No. Actually, in fact, the Fish and Wildlife Commission is completely self-funded through outdoorsmen and through these outdoorsmen. So anytime you go and you purchase something like ammo sometimes or you purchase a fishing rod or something like that from a store, there's an extra tax added in there that you don't notice. It's in the final cost there. And that money then goes to the federal government and gets kind of handed down. And also you've got fish and hunting licenses, tags, things like that. All those things go into funding Fish and Wildlife. So Fish and Wildlife is completely self-funded by outdoorsmen, and it is comprised of a council of people voted on by outdoorsmen, okay? So it has nothing to do with it. Now, there's a big controversy this year about that department because the governor wanted money from their fund because Fish and Wildlife, being run by mainly conservatives who understand what it means to conserve resources because they're in natural resources, have an excess in their budget. They have something like $70 million in the bank on top of they keep putting money into their bank and they're able to operate on this budget because they're doing a good job. And outdoors, they're managing their natural resources in a way that is providing an incentive for people to continue to spend money, but they're still doing it for a fiscally conservative way. And the governor wanted that money to make his balanced budget. He wanted, in his balanced budget, he wanted to pull money from Fish and Wildlife. And Fish and Wildlife director at the time said no. And the governor wanted to remove that director of Fish and Wildlife because he wanted that money. And so this was HB 394 was simply a bill to remedy that, to make sure the governor keeping, sorry, son just walked by me, making sure that the governor stays out of Fish and Wildlife like they're supposed to, like Daddy Beshear himself has said. And the governor vetoed it because he thinks he needs to be able to check the power of Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife is elected. You don't need to check their power. Trust me, you don't need to. And he says he needed to be in charge of the appointment and compensation of the director of Fish and Wildlife, something that the commission that is voted on is in charge of. So there you go. So that passed 75-21 in the House and Senate 35-1. So that will overcome veto. Veto just needs to have 51 votes in the House. It needs to be, it's a simple majority veto in the state of Kentucky. So people will know that as they're listening and following along. HB 518 lets the Ag Commissioner appoint members to the State Fair Board. So the governor claims it gives the Fair Board unchecked powers over contracts, claims it's unconstitutional. Once again, I don't think it's necessarily unconstitutional, but it does. I don't really see that much concern with how that's set up compared to Senate Bill 93, which he vetoed, that allows the Ag Commissioner to appoint members of the State Board of Agriculture instead of the governor. Now, the reason why this is kind of a problem for me, and I'm sorry, HB 518 passed 7418, Senate 32-2. That will probably overcome veto. But the reason why Senate Bill 93 is a problem for me is because, and I was actually talking to a few legislators about this today, was because the commissioner sits on that board already. So to have somebody sitting on that board to then be appointing people on that board would then cause a odd shift of power, where essentially the ag commissioner on the agricultural, the ag commissioner there on the Board of Agriculture would have more power than everyone else because he's in charge. He's their boss, right? So it would definitely be, I think, an issue. I do think that's kind of an issue for the. I kind of agree a little bit with that veto. But anyways, that passed in the House 71-21, passed in the Senate 29-6. A little more dissenting people there. I think a lot of them saw the same thing that we saw. So, of course, he's going to veto SB 228. That's the Mitch McConnell bill. I agree with the concept of saying maybe the governor shouldn't get too lonely by himself, appoint the replacement. So, SB 228 was in the event of a U.S. Senate vacancy, the State Executive Committee of the party of the former senator shall give the governor 3 choices for replacements. Basically, it's to say, hey, listen, if you're a Democrat governor and a Republican senator retires, like, I don't know, let's say Mitch McConnell retires, how do we stop him from appointing a Democrat into the Senate? That's the concern there with SB 228's addressing that. I think that's an interesting thing to address. I think there's a way to maybe look at that. I don't know if there's a way to say maybe, I don't know. I know I don't like what they said. I personally don't like the State Executive Committee of the party of the former senator shall give the governor 3 choices for replacements. The reason why I don't like that is because it feeds into more power of the swamp, right? It almost guarantees whoever replaces that senator would be a swamp monster, right? Because they have to be suggested by the ex-com of the party. So they have to play nice within the party infrastructure to even get suggested. And we all know the benefit you get as an incumbent when you're dealing with elections. So this would set it up where if I'm a senator in Kentucky, I might win my election and planning on retiring, but I know I'm going to get a bump just because I'm an incumbent. I go ahead and I run and I win, and then I hand it off to my party. I say, okay, now I'm stepping down, and now the party, I can handpick my replacements. That gives me the ability to handpick my replacements if I'm somebody like Senate McConnell. And quite frankly, his Senate seat is not his Senate seat. It is the people of Kentucky's Senate seat, and taking advantage of the incumbent system in order to replace him, I don't particularly am a fan of personally. But maybe you guys may disagree. I just don't like the idea of the swamp getting to pick the next swamp monster. So I don't know how I would fix that. I also agree just having that solely with the governor for such an important position, especially in times like these where the balance of power is so specific in the Senate. I don't know how I would fix that. I know I personally don't like the idea of the state ex-com of the political party suggesting people. HB 272 allows for water companies to impose late fees for people who don't pay their bills. He says it's unconstitutional. It passed the House 71 and kills people. Of course, you're going to hear a lot of it kills people. Passed the House 71-23, Senate 25-10. That should overcome veto clearly. And we'll see how that goes. Maybe some people change their mind, though, on that one because it's kind of interesting. House Bill 312 restricts Opens Records Acts. Of course, our great friend Ed Massey's put that forward. He's not a friend. He's a terrible individual. He is. If there ever was a rhino, Ed Massey is the rhino in this state. I can tell you that much. Look at every single bill that you think a Democrat would have wrote, and sure enough, Ed Massey's on there because he is probably the lead sponsor on it because he is nothing more than a rhino person. anyways, so basically what that was this is an act to make it to where it restricts your ability to get open records, creates less transparency. Beshear vetoed it, claims we need more transparency. A little ironic coming from him, considering these open records acts as what's pinned him to the wall a couple of times. But actually, I agree with the veto personally as a Liberty person. I don't like our government being more hidden away as far as that goes. HB 312 restricts HB 475 bans KY occupational safety and health standards boards from imposing regulations more strict than the federal standards from the 1970 OSHA Act. Beshear claims it hurts workers' safety. So basically this is saying, hey, you can't put in more stricter standards than what the federal government has for your occupational safety and health standards. Now, I think this is a pretty... I agree and I disagree, right? So I agree with the idea that saying, rogue, as we've seen state boards going crazy during the time of COVID, is something to get away from. However, I also agree that each state's a little bit different. So for an example, the coal companies, let's say, coal lobby could lobby, and I'm not saying they're necessarily a general and evil lobby. They have their problems. Certainly, and we'll just kind of move on from there. But the coal lobby could go to senators that have no stake in it because they have no coal in their states, and so their people won't care, their constituents won't care, the people who vote for them won't care, and so they may then turn around and get a bill sponsored and passed that makes the federal requirements for coal mines under OSHA there less restrictive, which then in turn leads to Kentucky now being less restrictive when we're a coal mining state, and maybe we feel differently. Maybe we feel that the health and safety regulations for the coal mines might be something we care more about. Now, that being stated, generally I don't like the government regulating anything at all, so take some as you see them, right? I don't know how I feel about that one. We've got Senate Bill, that one passed, the House 5935. That one's a little more of a nail biter. They can flip 8 and pass the Senate 2313. So that one will probably overcome veto, but we'll see. Let's see. SB 65 nullifies administrative regulations that are being found defective during the 2020 interim. Beshear claims this bill will starve children. Passes Senate 36, House 6823. That one will probably overcome veto. This next one here, Senate Bill 105. This allows the state to seize abandoned property after 1 year. I don't like it. I don't like the government seizing any property at all from any Kentuckians. Beshear vetoed this, saying the standard's too easy to manipulate. I personally agree with him on this. I know it's crazy, right? But I agree with him that these standards set forward in this bill that you could use to seize abandoned property is kind of easy to manipulate. Also as well, why does the state need to seize abandoned property necessarily? Somebody owns that property, figure out who owns it, and tell them, hey, you own this property. Maybe they don't know. Maybe somebody passed away. Maybe that is somebody's endowment that you haven't properly notified, and the state's just going to take it from them. I don't like that. I like to think that the ownership of property defaults to the people, not to the government. So there you go. Funny enough, also as well, a lot of that passed the Senate 2411, and it passed the House 8013. Funny enough, most Republicans that voted no on that, the Liberty Republicans like Southworth, Lockett, Maddox, Rayburn, I think maybe Baker voted no on that one. Let's talk about House Bill 258. Reforms the pension plans for new teachers. Forms a hybrid plan for people who are newly getting into teaching. Changes nothing for the people currently employed. And it raises the retirement age just 2 years from 55 to 57. Beshear claims it cuts benefits, so that's why he wanted to veto it. Which I guess is true, maybe, I don't know. I mean, these people don't work for us yet, right? So the main benefits it affects, the people it affects are the people who are just now coming in. So if those individuals want to work under those new rules, that is their free and equal choice to do so. I don't see why that's such a problem. And of course, naturally, I like the hybrid plan more because I think and I like privatized 401ks more than I like pension plans. And if you know anything about them, I think you would want it too. House Bill 563. This was school choice light. Beshear vetoed it because he claims it will harm public schools because, somehow choosing schools would harm public schools. Maybe that just means public schools suck. Like if getting to choose which school you go to will harm public schools, maybe that's our public schools suck problem. And maybe a little bit of choice might help. But anyways, he's claimed it's unconstitutional. He's threatened to do litigation on it. Unfortunately, it only passed the House 48-47. Now, let's talk about who in the GOP here, right? Who voted for this, who didn't, right? So, Blanton voted no. Branscombe, Bray, Dotson didn't vote, so there's an out there one. Because remember, we need 3 more votes to overcome the veto here. Let's see, Frazier, Fugate, Gooch didn't vote. Mark Hart voted no on it, I believe. Hervin, no shock there. Regina Huff voted no on it. Ooh, big shock. Kim King. Let's see. Derek Lewis voted no. Scott Lewis voted no. Of course, Ed Massey voted no. Let's see here. McCool, McPherson, Meredith, Petrie, Riley, Rowland, Sheldon, Smith, Timoney, White. They all voted no. And all of them that voted no, if they explained at all why they didn't vote or voted no, they echoed just simply Beshear's talking points. This will harm public schools. Now, what's weird about this bill is that it doesn't even apply to counties that have less than 80,000 population. So for many of these people who are voting no, they're coming from counties that don't have over an 80,000 population. They're representing counties that wouldn't be affected by this bill at all. And yet they're voting no on it simply because they're bought and paid for by the Kentucky Department of Education. There goes your tax dollars into taxpayer-funded lobbying again. And they also are in the pockets of the unions as far as it goes. And they can't afford to lose that union support. I mean, we all know that me and Huff get into it from time to time on Facebook. And one of the biggest things I call out on her from is she has Nima Brewer, when the founders of 120 Strong, the grassroots side of the unions, as she calls her a personal friend. Well, you know a person by the company they keep. And if they're going to call that particular human being, which remember was the one who said, let's start slitting throats, a friend, that tells you what kind of person they are. And that's what all these people are. So you look at that list, and that tells you which of the GOP members are in the pockets of the Department of Education, of the school unions, who are the ones you can't trust at all. Now, it's good and it's bad for those who prescribe to confrontational politics. It helps you know who to target, who not to. Hopefully, when this comes back around, some of the people didn't vote will vote yes. Some of the people who voted no might vote yes. It needs 3 more votes to pass. We'll see what happens. That one may not overcome veto, actually, so we'll see. SB 11 allows for the criminal protection of those who intentionally damage rental property. Beshear claims the bill is unnecessary. Well, if it's unnecessary or not necessary, I guess he's decided he just wants to veto it anyways. Passed the Senate 28-8, House 75-17. That'll probably overcome veto. SB 165 takes the governor's powers to approve government contracts and gives it to the treasurer. And it has some other stuff in there about eminent domain. This one shows a little bit of liberty issues. Rayburn and Southworth both voted no on it. Governor claims it's unconstitutional. Passed the Senate 24-9, House 71-26. We'll see what happens there. This one's funny to me, and it's funny to me just because I know this is going to sound weird, but I actually do know people who this bill affects, right? And that's SB 171, which allows cities to operate splash pads. Now, right now, and for those who don't know what a splash pad is, a splash pad is simply a pad of water. It's not really still standing. And it has, these jets that shoot up in the air. And guys, remember if you're listening to this, share the video. I'm only 30 minutes in. I still got a lot more to cover. Share this out right now. I am giving you guys a lot of good information, okay? And I feel like I should be rewarded with a share button because, I do this for you guys, right? I do it for you. Anyway, so splash pads, right? So splash pads, if you go into a city there, they might have some water jets and things like that. These splash pads, right? Normal stuff. You take your kid out, put them in maybe a bathing suit, maybe gym shorts, and they go and they can roll around in it. They can't swim. It doesn't have a lot of drowning risk to it. Well, current regulations, because it doesn't have its own, says that splash pads have to be treated like pools. So they have to have like backboards and shepherd's hooks and different pH testing things. They've got to have, a CPR, EAD thing, all kinds of different regulations. They're regulated, even maybe some lifeguard situations there. They're regulated just like pools are currently. And this would create its own, and this was meant to create its own separate statute that you could run splash pads under that doesn't cost, have the same thing for it. Now, this is, of course, going to be really good for lower income areas because if a city maybe can't afford to put in a pool, maybe they can afford to put in a splash pad, and if they don't got to provide a lifeguard and they don't got to provide all these other things, provides a way to cool down when it's hot out in lower income areas even. So I think it's great for that reason, but Bashir vetoed it, and he just vetoed it because he claims splash pads are dangerous. I'm dead serious. That's what he says. He says splash pads are dangerous. Those little things that don't have but like an inch of water at the most at a time that shoots jets up that, you've probably played in are dangerous. And they need to be heavily regulated like pools. And that is the governor's take on that. That will probably overcome veto. That seems kind of weird and ridiculous. HB 231 creates an assistant treasurer and makes her replace the treasurer in the event of a vacancy. The governor claims it's unconstitutional since governor gets to fill vacancies. Well, if a vacancy exists, but if there's somebody already set to replace them, like for an example, if a governor goes down, a lieutenant governor takes over the spot. So it's just creating a place to elect in. Listen, I'm all for maybe creating some redundancies there or an assistant treasurer to cover that. I'm okay with that, especially if they're voted for, just because it takes the appointing power away from a person and instead we'll give it to, the treasurer who we voted for directly to handle with this. House Joint Resolution 77 he vetoed. Now, this one's interesting. It's got a bunch of different executive orders. It continued, and it's a backdoor way, kind of. He claims it's unconstitutional. He, of course, says it's a surrender, and what he hopes are the waning months of COVID. That's what Bashir says. Basically, he just doesn't like it. He doesn't like it, and part of maybe why he doesn't like it is maybe you can use it to argue that all of his other mandates are also invalidated because back in 2020 there was a bill passed that made it to where the Senate could end executive orders, executive orders passed by the governor, and this would end them. He vetoes it, claims it's unconstitutional, hangs his hat on the Supreme Court of Kentucky. Well, I'm sure he will litigate that one like crazy because it has some implications for him. SB 49 that one was 7422, Senate 315. It will overcome veto. Senate Bill 49 excludes caregivers from hourly wage classification. Bashir claims it's anti-worker. We all know how I feel about minimum wages and things like that. Who knows what it may do? I think, if it stops people from getting a job, I don't think you could say that it's anti-worker, but what do I know? Senate Bill, that passed the Senate 28-7, House 72-20. Senate Bill 63, kind of interesting. It prohibits using voting systems that connect to the internet. Sounds fine to me. I don't see a problem. Requires voting systems to leave a paper record. That sounds good too, doesn't it? That would secure our elections. But here's where it gets weird. Bashir claims our Secretary of State, Michael Adams, asked him to veto it. I don't know. I mean, I don't what is going on that Michael Adams wants him to veto SB 63, and when I show you the breakdown of communication here, this passed the Senate 36-0, and it passed the House 96-1. 96-1 passed the House, Senate 36-0. Had even bipartisan support on it, and almost the entirety of the Republican Party supports it. But yet, for some reason, Michael Adams wants him to veto it. What is going on? Is there a breakdown of communication from Michael Adams to the House and the Senate to what he needs for voting systems? I mean, I think it's to something that prohibits voting systems from connecting to the internet and requires voting systems to leave a paper record. I think that's a pretty good. But for some reason, Michael Adams asked Beshear to veto it. Seems weird. Seems strange to me. We'll see what happens there. Maybe he lied. I don't think so, though. I mean, I'd be curious. I'd be curious to see what Michael Adams has to say about that. SB 148. He vetoed restricts governor and health department from regulating child care facilities. The governor says it's unconstitutional and dangerous. Might kill people. Senate Bill 251 gives the Attorney General the ability to challenge the constitutionally statutes outside of Franklin Circuit Court. Now, this is really good. And this one is, so what goes on whenever there's a statute filed, it has to be argued in, right now, Franklin Circuit Court. What's that mean? Well, that means just a couple of judges elected there in Frankfurt, elected by Frankfurtians? Frankfurtians? I don't know. If somebody knows what to call Frankfurt Knights, whatever you call people who live in Frankfurt, let me know. Anyways, that makes them able to pick and choose the judges that then get control like right now. So, for an example, Judge Shepard tying up SB1, HB1, and SB2 in court has made it to where the rest of the state doesn't get relief that it voted for from these mandates the governor's handed down. And this would allow the cases to be moved out into other courts because it wouldn't make it to where just a couple of Frankfurt Knights can decide who is the judge and who gets to hold up bills and who doesn't, and so on and so forth. Now, the governor, of course, says, well, this will cause judge shopping, forum shopping, right? And that's a thing. But really, he just wants to keep his cases in Judge Shepard's courtroom. And we're going to talk about why right now. Because this is real tyranny. We have some real tyranny going on. This is the kind of stuff you read about in history books. About the England Parliament doing or whatever through King George that we had to break off from. Okay, so here's what it is. So they passed a budget bill. And in that budget bill, they had a provision saying that notwithstanding any statute or common law to the contrary, and except as provided in this act, no state funds or state employee time shall be expended by any person or agency to implement or enforce any executive orders issued other than as authorized by K9R 90S 39A through 9F, as amended by the 2021 regular session SB1 and further amended by subsequent acts, the 2021 General Assembly. So what is he saying? He's saying that the governor, because what's the ultimate check that the legislator has on the executive branch? It's the powers of the purse. Well, right now, we've got all these bills we pass tied up in the courts. But the legislators get to pick the budget. They get to set the budget. That's their check. So with remember guys, share it right now. This is the important stuff we're getting to, talking about the governor wanting to arrest up legislators. This is when you need to share it. Now, the legislator has the ultimate check on the purse of saying what you can spend money on and what you can't. What the legislator's doing here is saying, okay, you want to hold up SB1, HB1, and HB2 in the courts and try to get it injunctified. We're going to turn around and we'll pass a budget. And in that budget, in our power of the purse, we're going to say you cannot expend money then to enforce the things that we are telling you are go against HB1, SB1, and SB2. So essentially what they're saying is We're using our ultimate check of the purse to stop you. Because you know what? We can't stop you from making mandates, I guess, because of Judge Shepard. But we can stop you from being able to spend money on them. That's what they're doing here. How did the governor respond to that? Well, here's his veto. I, Andy Beshear, Governor, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, pursuant to the authority granted under Section 88 of the Kentucky State Constitution, do hereby veto the following part. Page 174, lines 1 through 27 in their entirety. Page 175, line 1 in its entirety. Here's his note. I'm vetoing this part because it violates the separation of powers under Kentucky Constitution. It also directly violates a temporary injunction entered by the Franklin Circuit Court against the General Assembly itself, which could subject the body to a contempt of court citation. So let me get this straight, okay? And he continues on about, prohibits Kentucky Health from responding COVID-19 pandemic. COVID's killing us all. Let me restate what he's saying there. What he's saying is well, Judge Shepard has ruled that my orders are to be injunctified. The bill you're relying on, SB1, it's injunctified. You can't issue it. So what I'm saying is that if you pass this budget, so to the legislators, your ultimate check on the executive is on that purse. Once again, if you pass that budget with this item in it, I'm saying you're going to be in contempt of court. And I'm going to have you arrested for passing a budget. Now, you could say, Andrew, isn't there something called legislative immunity that stops legislators from being able to be sued or arrested in courts for normal things they do? Well, here's the problem. The problem is that Judge Shepard, on the record a few days ago, had stated that he believes legislative immunity doesn't apply during a pandemic. He thinks the law doesn't apply during a pandemic. So if Judge Shepard is willing to sit there and say he's suspending legislative immunity, and then he's going to hold the legislators in contempt for doing the very thing they are absolutely allowed to do, which is pass a budget that has a ultimate check on the power of the executive branch of defunding parts of it they don't want to see done. That is their constitutional right to do. Not only is he challenging to say that the judge is saying that he's willing to throw out legislative immunity, but on top of that, he will have you arrested, legislators, for passing the budget he doesn't like. Guys, that is tyranny. That is a dictatorship. We all talked about, not we, but they all talked about Trump's a dictatorship. Blah, 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 blah. You have a governor threatening to throw legislators in jail if they don't pass the thing he wants. That's tyranny. And we said it earlier in a post. I bet the impeachment committee really wishes they started impeaching him because right now they're being threatened with jail now. Remember how we were all threatened with jail if we went to church on Easter? Now they're being threatened with jail for passing a budget he doesn't like. I don't know what to tell you guys on that one. That's taking it to a new level for sure. It's taking it to a new level for sure. On the national level, I want to talk about one thing and one thing only. And that is the illustrious, wonderfully well-spoken President Biden, who knows exactly where he is at all times, and I'm sure is absolutely the one who's really pulling the strings. He came out and said he's going to get 200 million vaccines done in his first 100 days. Now, is he pulling the old switcheroo that they tried to pull the first time, saying 200 million? He's saying he's going to get 200 million shots done, so really that's only 100 million Americans fully vaccinated. Or is he saying 200 million Americans? Well, if he's saying 200 million Americans, he's kind of got a problem. And this is what I mean. So we've got Massey sending out a tweet with saying he's got recordings here of the CDC saying out loud something we all knew, that if you have had COVID, You do not need to. The vaccine won't help you. Pretty much is what they said. If you've had COVID, taking the vaccine will give you no benefit. Because, of course, as I covered the other day, we've had under 50 reinfections in the entire world. Confirmed reinfections. Considering the millions upon millions of worldwide COVID cases we've had, and we've only had 50 confirmed reinfection cases. It just doesn't really happen. In fact, more people have been infected with COVID after getting the vaccine than people who have been reinfected with COVID after getting COVID. And so they don't want to say that. And the reason why they don't want to say it out loud is because, well, not only does it already seem like, and you can call me crazy if you want to, but I've seen that there's been some people dying as a negative effect from the vaccinations. I've been seeing people talking about that. And I believe there's a couple hundred here in Kentucky based upon the varsing scene. I don't take that for gospel truth. Somebody listening may know exactly where that information is and may drop that in the comments for everybody to listen to. But considering, according to the CDC, we've only had 3 deaths under 30 in the entire state of Kentucky. To the state of Kentucky, though, for some reason, they say they have it's like 6 deaths under 30, which is kind of weird. But that they disagree. I don't know why. But anyways, it's a hazard to it's not a high guess to say that there has been more people that have died due to a negative reaction from the vaccine under 30 than have died from COVID. It might be real close too, because and it's not to say that the vaccine is necessarily extremely dangerous in that way to cause death. I mean, you vaccinate hundreds of millions of people at a time, you're going to get some negative reactions, right? It's more to say to people under 30, COVID isn't really that big of a deal. And so the problem becomes, if they're trying to get 200 million people vaccinated, but yet we find out that if you've already had COVID, you don't need to get it. And then you have young people like myself going out and we go and get tested for the antibodies and find out we've already had it, so we don't get vaccinated. Now you have large swaths of your population not getting vaccinated, and you can't push it on them. And it's hard to sit there and say, well, you got to get vaccinated. And they're pushing it as the end-all, be-all to save the problem because they want to point to it as what's saving people, while at the same time having a backup to say, well, you still got to wear masks and everything else. So that way, if a variant comes out and COVID comes out of, well, they've already been coming out, but if COVID restrictions come back because of variants running rampant, which I think we all think is a pretty good possibility that they're going to lean on, especially considering that article in Bloomberg that I posted earlier today, that they're going to want to put back in these restrictions. In fact, that's why you have blank spots on your vaccine cards. Bill Gates just a few months ago said that we would probably have to get vaccinations for the variants in the future. That's why you have blank spots on your vaccine card there for your next shots to keep up with the variants. Now, the problem, though, you have with getting 200 million people vaccinated is we only have 330 million people in the country, 75 million of which are under the age of 18. Currently, though, they're doing testing trials, which whoever would have your child tested for COVID vaccines, shame on you. Okay, listen, I guess everybody's got their own choices, but literally 0 children under 20 have died, according to the CDC in Kentucky, from COVID. Why in the heck would you be testing out a vaccine? Why would you want your child vaccinated? They're not dying from this. You definitely have a higher chance of your kid dying from being vaccinated than from COVID in Kentucky based upon the numbers. You 100% do. So I don't know who's getting that tested on. And I'm not saying this. Clearly, I'm not a doctor. I just look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. They clearly say CDC in Kentucky, 0 people under 20 have died from COVID. I'd have to imagine that COVID, that means, isn't as big of a risk as the vaccine is. But anyways, 75 million of that 330 is children. So that drops you right away to 255 million. Now, if you've already had COVID, means you don't need to get vaccinated. Again, that right off the bat takes us down another 30 million cases. That takes us down to only 225 million people possible available to get vaccinated. if we're saying we need to vaccinate 200 million people in order to hit Joe Biden's goal, he's planning on an acceptance of vaccination rate of those who one, need a vaccine, and by that I don't mean need it, I mean haven't already had COVID based on the CDC's own standards, can benefit from a vaccine. You'd have to get 89% of them to say okay. So clearly they're not going to release that you don't need to get vaccinated, that vaccinations provide no benefit to people who have had COVID already. Clearly, they're not going to release that out into the public, despite the evidence of them saying it out loud that Thomas Massey has. They're not going to say that because you can't hit your goal of 200 million, and you can't create that false sense of safety, of security that they're aiming for by saying, look at that, we've gotten 50% or 100% of our people vaccinated. It's safe to go out now. Thank you, government. You've saved the day. Because if the government does ever want to end this, they have to have a reason for ending it. If they just end it, it makes no sense on why they started it in the first place, and they can't have that. However, once again, I don't think that will be the case. I think it is far more likely that we end up with a COVID variant that doesn't respond to the vaccine, and we start this all over again. And you're going to see people like me, and you're going to see more and more and more people standing up saying, no, this is ridiculous. You fooled me once. You're not going to fool me again. Guys, as a reminder, please be sure to support us. Come by the coffee shop there in Lexington. You can buy coffee from us online at brewedco.com, brewedco.com. Of course, share this out. Tell your friends, tell your family. The podcast is growing quite a bit, getting several hundred plays on every episode, which I haven't done really podcasting a whole lot, so I don't know what's good and what's bad. But I think for a local state politics show, several hundred people listening to every episode through podcast form is pretty cool. So share that out there, guys. Spread the message, spread the word. Help people get informed on what's going on at the state legislature. Thank you guys so much.